Okay, welcome everyone. This is 15th of March. This is our APAC EMEA timed orchestration demo. And we are live streaming privately for now. So is there anything useful to demo, or do you want to jump straight to the discussion?
So actually, I might have something to demo, a little bit to demo, if you just give me 1 second. Sorry, should have actually thought about this a little. Okay, let me share my screen. Cool. So everyone can see basically a copy of the release environments repository. As you can see here, we'll try and make it a little bit bigger. This is just the private fork I have of it. So it's not the actual real release environments. So this, you can see here, it's under my namespace. It's a fork of the project. What I'm going to quickly talk about is what I've been looking at over the past 2 weeks and just a slight change in direction and how we're actually going to get deployments with release environments working for the first iteration of the kind of release environments work. So originally what I wanted to happen is I wanted the stable branch pipeline, so the pipeline in the GitLab or GitLab repository, to essentially do a full, I guess, GitOps kind of workflow where it might push a commit or open a merge request into release environments, set that merge request to merge when it passed, wait for it to merge, and then track the pipeline that was, running on main, deploying the actual new deployment. Doing all that automated it's not impossible, but it is tricky. And what I discovered when I was doing it is the experience for the developer or the person is not great. And this just comes back into some very big issues we have with GitLab and how we kind of can glue workflows together, or how we can't glue workflows together. If we were to do that kind of workflow, essentially what we'd have to do is, you would have a job that would do all this. And so the developers would see some deploy job that would be spinning away, and they wouldn't get the downstream pipeline at all, because you can only do that through triggers. You can't do that from you can't just attach two unrelated pipelines together downstream, even though I actually think you should be able to somehow join them together. And likewise, GitLab CI has no way of saying, this job is waiting on a merge request over here to be merged or something like that. Like, we're very limited into the workflow options we have with GitLab CI. It's not a very good general purpose workflow tool, unfortunate. So in the interest of trying to move things along quickly and provide possibly a little bit of an easier experience, and especially for people understanding what's going on, I've gone back to the traditional trigger model, as in you trigger a release, trigger a pipeline on release environments. You pass in two variables, the environment you wish to deploy to and the version you wish to deploy to, and it will basically deploy that for you. So that leaves the problem of, well, how do you still kind of reconcile that with what's in Git and make sure you don't have this kind of drift? And so what I've kind of done is this process of essentially developing the pipeline for release environments in two separate ways. It detects that if there is an environment and a version set in the pipeline, so they've been passed as environment variables, it decides that this pipeline process to deploy an environment is basically just deploying one environment. It's going to deploy the version you've passed in, and then if it's successful, it will commit that back to the Git repository. So if it fails, the Git state is of the old version. So another pipeline coming through won't kind of try and, because what the other problem we have is, right, is so if something goes wrong, we don't want all the other pipelines coming through and continually to try and do the wrong thing, essentially. If those environment variables are not set, we treat this like a normal pipeline, just like any other merge to master or merge process. So if I was updating something in global values, I do that in an MR, I merge it, the pipeline detects that there's no variables being passed, it's just the standard merge request pipeline that's being deployed, and it just does the normal thing. If I run a pipeline, I can run a pipeline here, but it will be from a trigger in the GitLab org repo. If I pass those variables in, it goes, okay, there's someone's trying to trigger me to do an actual deploy of a new version. So you can see here, Scarbeck was playing around with it as well. So why have sorry, I'm trying to actually, so here you can, and I've actually labeled the two types of pipelines. So if you see a pipeline like this, ignore the deploy failures. That means that this is a standard pipeline that's going off the latest commit to main. And then you might see a pipeline like this, where I've passed in two environment variables. And you see that pipeline trigger to deploy version 15.6.6 to environment 15.6 stable. And if we look over here, we'll see that it does the deploy and that it does the commit deploy. So it commits basically the change back. So a little bit of, scripting and stuff there to do a very simplistic job of saying, okay, we've deployed successfully. I want to make that change back into Git state. And we put skip CI so we don't get in a CI loop where we're kind of deploying multiple times. It's rudimentary. It works not too bad. The biggest problem is the security model, because essentially if you allow anyone to trigger a pipelines onto main, essentially you're basically saying you have to give them permissions to more or less be able to work anything in the repository. They can do anything with the repository, deploy anything, change anything, I believe. Like the permissions model GitLab has around, I want you to the ability to trigger a pipeline, but that's it, is really not there. All our permissions model is branch based. So you have like a developer branch, or you could do protected branches, but branching model does not work with infrastructure code, because if you try and have it a branch per environment, if I want to change, say, the global values, which version do I change? The one on main, the one on all of the branches, and then it starts to spiral out of control. You can't have two dimensions, unfortunately. Anyway, getting a little bit distracted. So that's what I wanted to demonstrate. I mean, I can do it here again. I can run a pipeline and go environment is 15.6 stable, and version, we can just make this up because it's not actually doing an deployment, 15.6.20. And you can see here, deploy pipeline to trigger deploy version 15.6.20 to environment 15.6 stable. This, you can ignore the renovate job. This will take a little bit to run. So that's basically it. So I think this is good enough for the first implementation. It gives us a simplistic model that we all know and trust, which is trigger pipelines. It gives us the downstream pipeline. So when a developer is merging to a stable branch, they will see the downstream pipeline and we'll be able to follow it, the pipeline, into the release environments. I don't think it's the best for security. And I do think the model of switching back to a kind of an automated merge request workflow or something like that, I do think is something we should look at doing, probably as part of the second iteration epic for release environments.
Thank you, James. So this is something we have been trying in the past with Helm charts. So when we developed the Helm charts integration for releasing auto-deploy Helm charts, and we've ended up never using that, but we had this thing.
Sure.
We basically implemented the same thing, because the level of complexity of upgrading the reference inside the charts were so high and was already implemented in the chart itself. When we say we're gonna trigger a job in the charts will I'm talking about the Helm repo, not the CNG, right? This will run an internal, the one that generates.
Oh, sorry, yes, the chart, not the image,
not the images. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the thing was, this will run its own internal script that is capable of figuring out the proper versions and everything, upgrading every file, and self-commit.
Yeah, right.
So we were doing exactly the same thing.
Sure.
What happened there is that we were not owning both sides of the thing. We never ended up using the auto-deploy, the chart, because a change in the chart may break the deployment. So those kinds of things break, and we are no longer using. We never used, and actually now the pipeline is not even working. But here, with us being in full control of both projects, I see opportunities to make sure that these things continue working, right? So that's not a problem. What I wanted to suggest is trying to figure out if we can work around is not the right term. If we can strengthen the security model by using something like an example. So as you said, you need the maintainers of GitLab to be maintainers of the release environment as well. That's the first thing, right? So they both need to be maintainers because they have to trigger downstream. So that's the first thing. And that's okay. But then maybe what we want to do is using kind of a bot token in the, I don't know how you generated the credentials for self-committing. Let's say if you're using a project scope token, basically what we can try to do is say only this project scope token is allowed to directly push on master. Maintainers cannot. They have to merge. So you can work on that. You can work on, I think there's also the Git hook. So I never done this with GitLab, but there should be a way for preventing things to get into a branch. So something like, if this is a direct commit to master, it is changing things that I should not change in terms of file. So these are then deny commit, reject. If it's a merge, okay. So I think there are options. Maybe not all of them are feasible, but there should be. As well as, if possible, this is not sure, I'm not sure about this, there should be this thing where only owners can change. I think we don't have this one. Only owners can change the protected branches and rules around branches, because otherwise maintainers can circumvent all the restrictions.
Right.
As long as it's in the audit, I mean, I'm fine in keeping this open, right? So it's the product. So if the product doesn't support this, doesn't support this. So probably there are options to try to make this stronger. And then I promise I'll stop. Because of this, we may consider having a fork of release environment. I mean, that doesn't have to be a fork. What I mean is that as long as release environment is only addressing the release environments, then I have no problems with GitLab maintainers being able to affect release environments, because that's the thing. We want to give them power to own things hand to end. Fine. If we end up exploring this concept with other type of environment that have stricter permission, then we're gonna fork and gonna have another, and so working on the Kubernetes level, right? So the credential inside the project will be restricted only to the namespaces that can work or on those environments. So I think we can try to work on this level of defining the permission model.
I think, that makes sense to me. I didn't think about that, but you're right. I could at least protect the commit part a bit better, probably with rules of like, maybe the bot token is the only one can commit back. That means they could still deploy, but it wouldn't commit it back to the repo. I think the big key here is that GitLab has, and possibly not just GitLab, honestly, it's really good security around branches, right? Like, so, if you've got this branch, you can protect it, if not, what have you. But what we need is security around files in a repo. And so what I started looking at was what code owners could do for us. Because really what I want to be able to say is, hypothetically, you need to do a merge request if you're going to change like the global values, or you're going to change like the memory settings or something like that. But here's a file where you specify the versions for this environment, right? So each environment might have a versions file. I'm happy for, XYZ people to change that. But that doesn't work with the pipeline model.
It's only for merge requests.
So that's why I'm thinking the second stage is we just have to kind of sit down and get a good understanding of how to automate merge requests that like work in a way where it's like, I trigger a job, it does create a merge request and like merges that using the security that like whatever the job is running as, it's talking to the API with that security, can set things to auto merge, and therefore I can go, okay, GitLab org can talk to these environment, or they can change these files, they can't change these files, and what have you. And that might give us, the question will really come down to talking with Amy about this earlier as well, is like, what as these release environments start to become more important to the process. So at the moment, we're doing the first iteration is really just getting things up technically, making sure we can kind of see this happening, it works, it makes sense. Then we need to concentrate on like, what do we have to do from a security, from an auditing perspective to make this, to the level where we can say, yes, this can be a trusted piece of the process. I mean, technically, it's all fine, but like if there's controls we need to put in place, if we need harsher rules, it might change the implementation in the future, depending on what people come back with. But we'll just see.
I would say this is, in any case, this is a testing and quality environment. So as long as there's no way to escape or say, the important thing is that you can't escape the namespace in Kubernetes and escalate into the production or things like that, right?
Yeah,
otherwise,
sure.
the gate is at the beginning. So maintain only those allowed to merge on stable branches will be allowed to propagate back.
Trigger.
And so we also need to make sure that then we have the right permission in place, right? So I mean, maintainers are, so we have groups for maintainers and things like that on GitLab project, and this should be the same rule, the same maintainers on the other one.
So I'll just quickly wrap up the demo here. You can see here, this is the one commit that was just created, update environment 15.6 stable version 15.6.20. We can have a description says where the pipeline with a commit back came from. If we actually look at the commit, it's you can see there it's updating it, all the different pieces. I may expand this as well. Sorry.
I have unrelated, and I related to that one before I forget about this. If we are going to put metadata in commit message as that one, we should use Git trailers, because then we can query by the API and we get them parsed. So we don't need them today, but we may need them in the future. So if you put them all at the end and with columns, so there are trailers, when you ask GitLab to give you the list of commits, you can ask to parse trailers. And so you can do interesting logic on the API.
Okay, cool. Okay, that's also good to know. Yeah. I was just going to briefly mention, if the deployment model becomes more complicated, I will actually replace the variables being passed in. At the moment, it's just environment version. It's very simple. But if it becomes more complicated, I'll actually replace it with a variable that's like deployment JSON or something, which is the upstream pipeline must actually parse in some kind of well-known JSON object of like all the deployment targets and stuff that it wishes to hit. And then I'll parse that downstream and do the appropriate pipeline.
There is an option in our pipeline system for Trigger to download artifacts from the upstream.
Yeah, I saw that as well, which is another similar thing. Like if we generate an artifact that says this is a deployment target, like we can define a schema that's more complicated than just environment version, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We can, if the need arises, which it might, we'll just expand upon that. Cool.
Just on the, as the environment comes up, Graham, do you already have anything around kind of checking the health of the environment? Like how do we determine like it's up and healthy?
So beyond just Helm doing its basic checks at the moment, that's it. I agree, that's a thing. I've kind of pushed that into a second phase kind of idea, because really, so let me kind of give an overview of what I'm really thinking is like, what's phase one? And as I said, the focus is just trying to get some pieces working technically. So there's three really main pillars to this. Getting images built, so the interface with CNG and really getting the images built and making sure, yes, those images contain the code we expect. There's doing which I've already got merged now to GitLab or GitLab. There's the deployment of that, which now I've got that trigger interface. So I've got a method of doing that. It's not the best method, but it is a method that should work. And then the final piece is running QA. I have the pieces together for running QA. So from what they've given me, I think I can piece together something. And not piece together, that's probably it. I'm confident I've got enough now to build a job that will run QA against that environment. And so that's kind of the next piece is I'll actually build together that job.
Mm-hmm.
So where we are at. So the way this kind of all works from a developer perspective and in the stable branch perspective is on the pipelines that run on stable branch, right? So whenever you merge an MR to a stable branch, we have a few different, you've got your aspect tests, we've got some child pipelines doing bits and pieces. There is now a new child pipeline specifically called release environments, and it's a child pipeline that lives, it's just a dynamic, or it's not even dynamic, it's just a child pipeline that lives in the GitLab or GitLab repo. But what that means is you look at that little pipeline, and that should be this 3-phase end-to-end kind of process. Build images, deploy, QA. Now we can once we have that there, that pipeline, we can expand. Do we want to check health metrics? Do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? We've got the basic building blocks there to expand that out. And because it's a child pipeline and it's an own files in the GitLab org repo, I feel like it'll be easier for us to iterate because we can kind of own that child pipeline and own that pipeline, if that makes sense. Like, it's hard to, like, once putting it in the right spot in the big pipeline obviously affects a larger group of people. But now that we are like, we've got our own pipeline, I feel like, we can hopefully get more reviews and change that a lot quicker, because it has been a bit tricky to get that change getting reviewed and moved in. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. Now, what this means is it's been merged to master, but it hasn't really been 100% tested yet because the child pipeline only fires on stable branches. And because that change was merged to master, we haven't, and not a stable branch, therefore we haven't really got it happening yet. I did an RMR up that I know that I think is sitting with Alessio at the moment to backport that change into the 15.9 stable branch for testing. But the other thing that will happen is when we do the RC, now someone can correct me here, when we do the RC for 15.10 is when we create the 15.10 stable branch. And when that branch is created, it will pick up the copy of GitLab CI from main, as all branches do when they're created. And then it will have this change, and that will also, start basically building out it will start running this release environments pipeline.
This is all allowed to fail, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
All of it. If it's not, I should go fix that. I'm pretty sure I set everything allowed to fail, specifically because I do not want this to have any actual real impact on.
So
what's
for
going
15.10, we will have for the first time the race
Unless
between the pre-environment and the release environment, both installing the RC. They will.
Well, they will be. At the moment, they'll just be building images. And then what I'm hoping is, and then I'll actually, because the tricky part is I kind of want, I do need to do the other parts, but I kind of was hoping to make sure I could validate the child pipeline worked and the image. There's no point me putting the trigger deploy in until I know the images are coming out, kind of like. So if we merge the backport, then we could test it today on 15.9, or we can just wait until 15.10. I guess in what, 5 days, less, 4 days, 3 days, when the 15.10 RC is created.
It's all for the 20.
So
20th?
Monday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So either way, we'll I'll actually get some real feedback about the images. I will go in, I'll validate them myself that, they're giving us the code that we're right. And then I'll probably do an MR to start adding the trigger, like the deploy trigger. And that will probably then need to actually get it working. We'll have to need to back all these CI changes. We'll have to get backported onto a stable branch of it, obviously, to actually make them useful, because being merged onto master, CI changes merged to master won't really affect things until it's kind of like I have to develop them on master, and then I'll kind of get them all backported onto stable branches, I guess.
What will this look like on the actual merge request? So on 15.10, it's also the first stable branch where we'll be having developers merging stuff in. Like, what does this look like if it fails?
Sure. So what they will see is they'll see, just like any of the other child pipelines we have now. Let me see if I can show an example. Let's have a look. Let's go to GitLab or GitLab. Yeah, so the big thing is this job will be allowed to fail. So nothing we do here, I do want to actually cause anything to break for people to actually hold up work or anything. This is just a purely, so this might be a good example. So what it's going to look like, I And I really wish I could show the real one. Actually, I wonder if I can use the. No, I can't. We'll need to wait for 15.10 stable maybe. You'll have another downstream over here, and it will say release environments, and there'll be a box to the side, and it'll have one job, which is trigger CNG. I think something like that. I can't remember. It's build images or something like that. If it breaks, it's allowed to fail, so it'll do the whole exclamation mark, and we definitely will, obviously we need to start developing documentation of like, okay, so this pipeline breaks, what do we do, kind of thing. But at the moment, it's just trying to get confidence that the pipeline's there and it works. And but we can tell people to ignore it for the moment. I'm happy for people to just ignore the failures. But then eventually, obviously, as we get confidence, we will, that will not allow failures. We'll actually want the QA results to pass, and you'll have to demonstrate that QA is passing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Graham, are you also going to be affected? Are you also working towards running the package and test suite? Is that the one that would be run on these release environments?
That is a good question, and I don't believe so. So package and QA
test.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, okay. Package and test builds a all-in-one Docker image and runs it in the GitLab runner. It's actually crazy that it works. I'm very impressed, but it runs just as Docker container with everything inside it, inside the runner VM that's like running over in GitLab CI. And I believe the test suite is much smaller. I could be wrong. I believe the suite is smaller because of the limitations of that setup. So for example, right, with release environments, because they are full release environments, we get CAS, we get pages, all those things that live off subdomains. So we get like pages.15.6.stable or whatever. Like we get the full, we can, my goal is to try and build these environments, which is with as many of the components enabled as possible, so that we can run the largest test suite possible.
Because what I was just wanting to see if we can maybe, if we have a thing we need to get ahead of, is whether we have a stable enough test suite. So I'll take a look at that, because one thing on the work Myra's been doing is, we know that the package and test suite isn't going to be set as blocking because of the number of the percentage of flaky tests in there. Possibly becomes too noisy. So we may want to sort of review that as well.
So QA tests. So this is the issue. I'm just trying to figure out where to put this in the QA tests issue. So we can have a look at that issue. So what I believe we've landed on is GitLab
QA is what.
Yeah, the GitLab QA gem. But so that gives me, and I've actually like been running that myself, trying to like recreate how is this going to look. And there's some discussion there about flags I need to do and settings I need to do, which is all fine. That's just configuration. But the tricky one is, or what I need to do is I still need the stable branch pipeline to build me a QA image, right? So that I think we do that as part of this packaging QA test. I will validate that, but whatever it means is that we're already building some image with QA tests, and I will just be already. So we already do that, and I will be reusing.
It's not published. That was the problem that we're addressing. So as far as I understood, it gets published where it's supposed to be, only on tag. So this is what they were mentioning when they said, you can kickstart this process because the stable branches for us begins with RC42. So there is already a QA image for that, and that's okay. But every single things you built on top of that will still run on the previously tagged image. until you tag again, which means that if you have an issue in the QA image itself, so not in the code, but in the QA, you cannot get the green QA until you retag.
Okay.
But this is the technical details, and it's already in the pipeline. So it's just designed to only publish those images on tags on stable branches. So it's just a matter of
I'll change that.
Change that and make those image available to us.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. Yeah, I think they weren't being. You're right. They weren't being published, and we'll turn that on for the use case we now need, and then we'll just use that image. Now the GitLab QA gem. This is the thing I'm still not 100% sure is like it says, oh yeah, you can run QA tests. I assume that's the full tests. I looked through the settings. There was besides there was some smoke. You could set smoke only for a subset, but I believe just by running that gem, I'm supposed to be getting a full test suite.
So probably we want to run the smoke tests because are the only one that are supposed to be reliable.
Oh, so you're saying we should cut that just to smoke? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, if my understanding is correct, there are several toggles on what you can run. Sure. One is smoke, which is give me the curated reliable set of tests. And then even in the smoke test, there is another distinction about knowing if you ever not admin access to that instance.
Right. Yep.
So for in staging, that Sanad mentions that you can turn off because apparently on release we don't run those, so probably the same for the release environments here.
Yeah, maybe we want to run them because I think we run them on staging. On staging we run the admin, but we don't run them in production.
That sounds right. So there's a few
the most coverage and most stability. Let's try to balance those.
Sure,
the idea, long term, as much as possible with the most predictable stability if possible.
And definitely, I think we'll make this decision obviously to not have things be painful for us while hitting the max coverage. But I do think, and I think we're all in agreement here that if people want to expand that later, like that is us working with quality.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, I think that the main thing that we should check in on, and we might have that information already. I'll do a little bit of a cross read on a different issue and just see if we already have the information, is what percentage of known flakiness is on this test suite, because that was something that I and Myra had a good chat about with package and test, and that's what's determined that on the kind of interim solution, the one that will go live next week with 15.10 for developers merging in, is that package and test won't be blocking because it is known to have a high percentage of flakiness. And what will be more damaging is to immediately build in the behaviors where every developer is like, oh, it failed, I'll just keep retrying forever. It's actually less work to allow it to fail and have quality do some manual work if needed. Definitely not a good long-term thing there because it creates more manual work. So getting what I think either we find a test suite that's stable enough, or this will be, I think, a good one for us to be able to give quality a heads up that like, hey, this is the direction we're going to need a stable test suite that has decent coverage that we can set to be blocking.
Sure. I think then for the interest of just kind of moving, like you're right, we should do this. We should have this discussion. Sounds like what I will do just to move forward quick is just do smoke only to start. We can always change it later.
With whatever. I mean, honestly, at the stage we're at, Graham, like it doesn't need to be blocking. So you can pretty much use anything and see what it starts to look like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess that's true as well. We can just see what it looks like.
Yeah, as long as it's start, then it's just a matter of making sure that it actually also pass.
Exactly. What will also be interesting is I'm guessing that probably for like 15.10 at least, we will have almost all three processes running, right? So we'll have the sort of interim one that Myra and Sanat have figured out, which is for allowing developers to do the thing. We'll have the existing one, which is before we, when we tag, we will run things on release event, and we will have this coming in at some point. So we will actually be able to compare the different test results we're getting. And that might also give us some idea of like, did we get 2 test suites passing and 1 failed? Did it matter? And we can start to make some judgment calls there.
I also suspect there's going to be a level of flakiness at the start for release environments because I might need to tune them. Like at the moment, I've just left everything default and I might like, oh, look, we're getting timeout errors because I haven't made the pods big enough, or I forgot to configure this, so like getting, just working through the like, the kinks to make them run fine in a test environment.
For sure.
I suspect there'll be a bit of that.
What did you end up doing for security releases, Graham? Like, do these get triggered when?
No, so this is all canonical. So this is all canonical. So when we do the pushback and go public, then they will deploy to security to release environments. This was another kind of conscious decision because when we start talking about security releases in terms of deploying them to real environments as well, the security question becomes higher. The questions I was saying earlier, the implications of security just start raising up. So I thought, let's short circuit that. If in the future, if we
can fork them, right? So as we were discussing before, right? So having a security fork of release environment that is only triggered on the security commits.
Yeah,
I mean, just you need to make sure that they don't overlap because obviously the triggering the push mirroring, but it's something doable because we can distinguish between a merge event. I merged something on stable branch and the mirroring trigger the mirror and push the things, right? So
what I'm thinking is if we get buy-in from security and everyone, and they're like, yep, no, these environments are secure and the information you have in there in that repo is not it's not bad, then what I think we do is we just change the pipeline, like literally that whole child pipeline, instead of running on canonical, it just runs on security. Like we just flip it over and then.
Well, but then you have no, you can't because there's a problem with ownership.
Right, would have to.
What I would like to ends up having is getting rid of the automation for merging things and having, let's say, AppSec or someone that has the right to make the judgment call where this fix is working on all the backports and is legitimate, is actually a bug fix, and so they can mass merge the things, right? So and so only those allowed to merge on stable branches on security will be able to trigger a deployment on the security release environment.
Yeah, you're right, and I think we can kind of figure that out when we get down the road. I think too, with the release environment stuff, we can look at reuse a bit better. Like I can take all of the stuff out of it into a common repo, and then you just include you can create release environments, you can create secure release environments, you can create GitLab com deployments or whatever, and they all just inherit off the one repo, like not even full forks, but just empty repos that just have the environment files, but all of the CI logic and all that stuff is just included via includes or whatever. And that way you can just, you're not having to actually, if I want to make a tweak to any of this workflow, I'm not, having to worry about forks. It's just all in one place. And then all of our repos that kind of work in this model just work just get the updated workflow. We'll see. I mean, this is kind of in the future, right? We'll see how that works.
Something else. This is just a small drop in, and definitely not. This is not a fully formed thought, and I'm not expecting it to become a thing that we know much about for some time. But just as an interesting one, Graham and I chatted this morning about the fact that we don't really have an entry point, a single landing page. But I wonder, as well, as we sort of think about things on stable branches and in different places and things, whether there's something that sits in front of a lot of this, where it's kind of almost I can see this MR, I can see which environments it's on right now, or I wonder if the whether we're going to end up needing, from an orchestration team point of view, just an orchestrator essentially to keep track of all these things.
I
call it a work. If there's a page which has all the possible environments and it shows ticks of where your stuff is, or it feels like pulling all of this together might be useful at some point.
I was trying to take a look at Backstage, but I've never had time to actually play with that one because I'm feeling that it might solve some of those problems. Maybe not all of them, because it can do a lot of stuff. So, but maybe
I'm
not
sort
the
of
thing that we need.
suspecting the same. I used to work in a place, it was a different problem, but it's something that worked really nicely. Was we had a lot of difficulties keeping track of dependencies. It was like a microservice environment. We had a lot of trouble keeping track of like which version of which microservice was installed on which environment. And somebody in the end just created like a service with a landing page, and it just listed them all, and you basically just got the version numbers for each environment, and it was so useful. I wonder if I do think at some point we're going to need to have something, maybe backstage or something to coordinate.
We were having this conversation last week or the week before with Skarbek and Michele when I shared them the scripts for the Xbar, the one the Ugrains were commenting that they don't run on Linux, and so what I told them is yes, we need a panel where say just on auto deploys is different. It's more about from starting point is probably the packages. So these are the packages and what happens to those packages. While on release environment, the starting point are the environments, but still this is kind of the place to go. I think that maybe Grafana can do this, but we don't know enough about Grafana. This has always been my thought about this. I'm
interesting.
Maybe
so.
Be able to do some of this.
That's an interesting point.
The other point of not Romulus, auto deploys is that what the script is doing is just doing API calls on ops, and so all those API calls can be also made on JavaScript. So you can just build a single page application that just forces you to log in on ops. And then if you can see things on ops, it can rebuild the same things if only we knew how to do a single page application in JavaScript. I mean, last time I've done something like this was 5 years ago. So yeah.
Can we get someone out of a university course? I feel like they actually probably have done a lot more of this than we have.
So I was actually... I was thinking about this as well, and it's like, to me, like a page for some of this information is good, but what I was actually even thinking beyond that is like an actual workflow engine. Like we need a proper workflow engine, and what I was looking at actually, talking about Backstage and everything, I was looking at the two workflow engines I know of for this kind of stuff is Octopus Deploy and Spinnaker, and this is the kind of thing, this is what I was saying earlier about like the limitations of GitLab CI. Like if we try and do everything via GitLab CI pipelines, but we have the UI feedback is not great. Like, and if I want to say, go to ops, open an MR, go to dev, check if a package is built, it's so hard. Whereas with these kind of tools, you can build plugins and actually give the user like an actual what's going on. Oh, by the way, I'm waiting for packages on ops. I'm doing this. I'm waiting for this MR to be merged. You know, these kind of like actual workflows that just GitLab CI is a fantastic tool for CI, but we're trying to build actual business workflows. The self-managed release process, you know, how much have we got sitting in issue descriptions, and it's very complicated, and it'd be great if it could update dynamically, if the steps would like real-time change as things are happening, so you can really get a grip on that. And so it's interesting because I think there is a whole market for those tools, and it's not a big market because a lot of times people's workflows are simple. Oh, I just commit a thing and it runs a Helm install and away you go. But when we start hitting the level we're at, where it's like we have complex workflows, I think GitLab CI is just, unfortunately, it's just not, it doesn't give us the user experience for complicated things. And it shouldn't just be GitLab CI. Like we build things like environments, deployments, like protected environments, deployment, like valid, what is it, where you can like control, someone has to click a button, deployment approvals. We build all this stuff, but it's just not good enough for our workflow, and the UI is really hard for us to kind of to actually consume. So in other words, I'm completely
at the
on board.
moment, Graham, I just want to counter that by, this is exactly where, as we build this stuff and we see this, where we can feed this back in, right? This is why, like,
absolutely.
I think
It's not
as much as
unsolvable.
we can capture these, like, here is the use case we have, here's the problem we're trying to solve, and here, here's what the information people need to see. And then maybe like we do lean on something like Backstage as a kind of like POC type of
exactly,
something that jumps us that way, because I think this is absolutely the stuff as I've been talking to other stage groups, is this end-to-end flow is so difficult for people who are not release managers to really wrap their head around, because it's so complicated. That I think we can feed that in. One thing that led me to say my kind of original thought is, one challenge I can see coming up around the opening up the stable branches and adding in these extra environments is the sort of the, not a huge shift, but just the slight difference between when we're in a security release and when we're not in a security release. At the moment, that's already really hard for people to see, but they don't necessarily need to see too much of it, so we kind of get away with it. I think that's going to become more painful. I just wonder if there needs to probably be more ways that people can actually see the status of their changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, trying to give that overview, as I said, like a business overview, not just that like some CI jobs are running, like this is the phase of that a security fixes in. We're accepting MRs, we're not accepting MRs. It's like, how do you capture that and like demonstrate that? And I don't think I think that's such a custom process to GitLab. How do we write something that's custom to that we can encapsulate all of our processes that are kind of custom and tricky in a way where we can put it in front of people and they can see what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if we're going to have cases where teams like who have setups like Gitaly are going to kind of accidentally merge stuff in and end up blocking themselves without realizing they're going to block themselves because of like merging onto a stable branch, and then we're in different statuses. Like, it feels like it's probably some edge cases like that we haven't yet come across, thought about. We'll find out.
Okay.
Just from the way the mirroring works. I'm sure there's going to be some edge cases like that. We'll find out.
Mirroring is a whole other problem. Like, that's a whole other problem, right? Which is just like so much of our products functionality, just like the concept of mirroring, not only mirroring downstream to repos, but mirroring to a completely different GitLab instance, that we just, it's so hard to track and do, because
so
we're
hard,
not, because we're the only people who realistically have a process that's doing that. Because why, who deploys multiple GitLabs, right? And like throws all their code around inside them all, like.
I mean, private forks are probably common also elsewhere, but
private
it's
forks,
also common that probably everything is private. But also everything is private by default.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, awesome. So one thing, Graham, from the back of this demo is it would be good to make sure that in Myra's documentation and announcements and things, we just have the specific release environment name, so we can say, definitely ignore this stuff.
That makes sense. Sounds good.
Just so that we can make sure it's super clear. There's one unfortunate thing for the first iteration is people have to kind of do a manual step on that package and test suite. So if it fails, they have to take an action. So they have to watch it themselves. Because it's allowed to fail. So just to make sure they know this bit, you can just ignore.
It's completely
coming
ignored,
later.
Yeah, exactly.
Later.
Work in progress.
Awesome. Great. Is there any other stuff we should chat about? No. Do we need to do we make a decision? Are you going to wait for the 1510 branch, Graham, or are we going to backport the?
I'm running the pipeline on the backport. If
Super.
They are okay, I would merge it.
Okay.
I just
Cool.
took a look. My understanding was it was a brand new thing, but it's a backport, so it was ready. Deeply
it's already merged to main.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just checking what is.
Yeah, that's fine.
Awesome.
If it breaks, obviously just revert. it should, like, if it breaks, it should just be allowed to fail. But if it does cause a big issue, obviously just revert it, and then I'll go and have to figure out what I've missed.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, sounds good. Great. Thanks so much for the demo, Graham, and thanks for discussions, both of you. Hope you have a good